The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Okay, we recorded a whole episode of the Chris Johnston Show earlier today on Tuesday, and then some big news happened. So this is an add-on to the beginning of our show. Two big pieces of news for us to talk about, CJ. Let's start with the first one being the Toronto Maple Leafs. They trade Joseph Woll and Simon Benoit to the Philadelphia Flyers in exchange for Emil Andre, Samuel Ersson, and a 2026 third-round draft pick. CJ, what can you say about the trade?
Interesting deal. You know, obviously for Philadelphia, they're hoping that Joseph Woll can team with Dan Vladar, who, you know, they're on the verge of signing to an extension and, you know, basically take a step forward in his career. I think, you know, for Toronto this offseason, they've got an abundance of goaltending. You know, they've had Artur Akhtamov, carry the load of games as the Marlies have gone to the Calder Cup. Dennis Hildeby's in the mix. He played pretty well when he got in games with the Maple Leafs at the NHL level. And then you've also got Anthony Stolarz still signed. And so it was a crowded crease, an area, I think, if you're Toronto where you're looking to address other areas of your team, it was a position of strength that they could deal from. You know, the key to the deal coming back, I think, from the Toronto end is Emil Andre. You know, he's a puck-moving defenseman, which is something the Leafs do not have an abundance of in their organization at this point in time. And so, you know, he's an undersized guy, but, you know, he does something that the Leafs need. And so that's the real return. Whether or not this, you know, tilts the scales one way or another, I think will depend on Woll's health. You know, he was a pretty well-regarded guy by the Leafs organization. He played a lot of good games for them, but, you know, part of the story of his career so far in the NHL is just not staying healthy enough at times, not being available to the team in opportunities when they needed him. And so, you know, perhaps he can find a little more stability in Philadelphia. And obviously he's got a nice tandem mate in Vladar, who had a great year there last year. So, you know, it's an interesting trade, intriguing trade. I think a bit of risk assumed on both ends of the equation. But it's a sign too, man. The offseason's here.
John Chaika already at it with these moves. I'm curious with how much more room there is to grow for a player like Emil Andre, who fits the profile of defenseman that the Leafs need. But this is we're looking at a defenseman here over his last during the last season, 13 points in 61 games. But he's also 24 years old. I'm curious, what could the ceiling be for Emil Andre?
Well, look, he played 70 plus games for the Flyers last season, so he was in their top six on a team that made the playoffs. You know, the fact that the Leafs get him, and you know they're going to gain some cap flexibility as well with this trade. Not that Toronto's in a cap, you know, they don't have any cap issues, but I mean it's always nice to gain some flexibility. You know, Samuel Ersson coming off a disappointing season. You know, he's truly a bit of a reclamation type project I view for Toronto, but he's also an RFA who needs a $1.6 million qualifying offer. I mean, no guarantees and no word at this point in time if the Leafs will extend him that, but certainly, you know, he's going to be a little cheaper than Joseph Woll, probably less upside on his end of the equation. But, you know, this is the give and take of a deal like this. I don't think it's a slam dunk on either side. And really you're dealing with some young players here, you know, Ersson a little bit older, but Woll, a young goaltender, Andre, you know, with some room to grow into his career. So, you know, I think I like the ideas behind it because there definitely is a little bit of a bet aspect. And, you know, if one of these players really takes a meaningful step forward in their careers, we'll look back on this as a trade that, oh, wow, how did they give up on him just before he went in this direction? So, I like the spirit of the deal. It's definitely some creativity, and risk involved in it. And, you know, we'll see where it goes from here. But from Toronto's end, I think when you look at their two established NHL goalies, Woll was always going to be the easier one to move just because Stolarz similarly has been even more injured, you know, in the crease, and it's just due to start a new contract he signed at the start of last season. So I think that there was always going to be more value for the Leafs in moving Woll, and, you know, the value here, I guess, is they add an extra third round pick. Something they haven't had of, you know, as much in the cupboard, and they get Andre, who, you know, still likely has his best days ahead, but it's not clear. You know, he's probably a third pairing guy, but can he one day be a second pairing guy? I mean, that's probably the question there.
Well, last question on the Leafs before I move on to the second piece of business. Do you anticipate more activity from John Chaika and the Leafs when it comes to trades?
Oh, for sure. I mean, he's been clear in taking this job that the Leafs need to remake their blue line. This is one piece, one drop in the bucket, but not certainly the full picture from the Leafs end of things. So, there's still some buzz out there about maybe Matthew Knies' name being on the trade market. Obviously, Morgan Rielly is a possibility to be moved out here by the Leafs. And while I expect them to be active in free agency as well, the trade market really is where they're going to have to get creative to turn the ship around quickly. And so, I think this is just the beginning. I mean, it's a real time of change in Toronto. This is a pretty refreshed front office. It's not just John Chaika and Matt Sundin new, but, bringing in Judd Brackett, they've kind of changed up a lot of what they've had in the past. They're going to have a new coach at some point and perhaps even a new coaching staff, although there's no word yet on the assistants. And, I think that there's going to be more change to kind of the core of the team as well as we get here deeper into the summer.
Let's get to story number 2. John Tortorella will not be back as head coach for the Vegas Golden Knights. How did the Vegas Golden Knights get here? What can you say about that story?
Well, there was a sense that I had certainly leaving the Stanley Cup Final that this was going to be it for him, that it was a short-term gambit. Obviously, played out to the degree that, the Golden Knights go all the way to Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final. When they fired Bruce Cassidy with 8 games left in the regular season, it wasn't sure they were going to make the playoffs. So it's fair to say this worked out. But, I think that the Golden Knights have a coach in Ryan Craig in their organization. He's with their American Hockey League team. And then previously been an assistant in the NHL for them, who, is likely to take this job. And with Tortorella, I think it was a short-term move that produced short-term results. But, I didn't leave Vegas at the end of the final thinking that, that he'd be back. So, we'll see if he gets in the mix here with one of the other openings. Edmonton and Toronto still out there and open. But, for Tortorella, it's a quick one and done there for him in Vegas.
And if you're Vegas now, who's left to succeed after you had Cassidy and Tortorella? So you have Edmonton and Toronto who need head coaches, and now Vegas has inserted themselves into the coaching carousel. Who do they target?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I mentioned, their solution is in-house. I think that Ryan Craig is likely to be the guy. Now, they didn't make that announcement on this day, so perhaps there will be a little bit more of a search to see if there's something else that makes more sense. But, I know he's very well regarded in the organization and has been seen as a potential successor to this role, even at the time when they're moving on from Bruce Cassidy. So I think Tortorella gave them the sort of spike they needed in real time, but that the longer term solution was always going to be someone a little younger and at a different stage of his own career. And so that's where I think they're ultimately going to turn once they go through their process.
All right. Great work as always, CJ. It's always crazy whenever we have to do these add-ons for one story. I don't think we've ever done it for 2 stories breaking at the same time. So great work as always through your work at The Athletic and on this podcast. And for everyone listening to today's episode, enjoy the rest of our show. CJ is back from Las Vegas following the conclusion of the Stanley Cup Final. The Carolina Hurricanes did it. We actually called it, the Carolina Hurricanes winning in 6 over the Vegas Golden Knights. You were there for every game of the Stanley Cup Final. How did the Carolina Hurricanes accomplish this feat?
Well, I think the door was really open for them when in my preseason predictions, I said that the Carolina Hurricanes would be Cup champs, which actually makes me think, Julian, in all seriousness, I should retire from the prediction game.
No, don't do that. Don't get out of this.
But I have made so many predictions that were dead wrong over the course of this show. But this is what I nailed in preseason and even picked them Canes in 6 once we got to the start of this final. So I feel like a run like this will never come again. It's sort of like having maybe just been in Vegas. This is in my mind. Like when you go on a run, you got to stop, because if you keep playing, you're eventually going to go back to losing. So maybe we'll retire the predictions for now. But I mean, how they did it, I mean, it was clinical, really. An impressive run for that team to go 16-3. They never faced elimination. Were in control most of the series. Now, the Vegas one was clearly their toughest opponent. They could have been down 2-0 if not for a late Game 2 comeback. They could have been down 3-1 if not for a comeback in Game 4. But once they won that Game 4, with Brandon Bussi in the net, they were able to win the last two. And, I think injuries were definitely a negative factor on the Vegas side of the equation. But, Carolina didn't have any holes in their game. I think they were pretty much a 65 or 70%, in terms of shot generation through the playoffs. They were great on specialty teams. They had the best penalty kill in the league. And they had a lot of power play goals in that Vegas series, which was kind of a surprise because it was one of the areas maybe when the final started, it was a question mark for Carolina. So, top to bottom, they found a way to get it done. And then Brandon Bussi was a great, almost Cinderella story that he came back in, wins his first 3 playoff starts in games 4, 5, and 6 of the Stanley Cup Final. A guy who was working at Chipotle a few years ago for a summer job. Pretty cool story, and nice to see his family on the ice. They were kind of a big part of the broadcast and everything that was going on with Brandon.
There are worse places to have a summer job than Chipotle, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I say it with respect, man. You know that I wear my Wendy's creds with pride. So,
oh yeah,
there's nothing wrong with hard work. There's nothing wrong with a summer job or a job that is not your forever job, but you're hustling on your way up. So. I say it mainly to say that he took a different road here than some other players, he was so good, especially I think in the last 2 games in the series. Vegas didn't have a whole lot going on in the closeout game until the third period. And then as you'd expect in a 2-0 game, they brought the house and had some really good looks. Jack Eichel, I think, is going to have a long summer, rang one off the crossbar, but just wasn't able to score in that series and didn't score in the Stanley Cup Final a few years ago when he was there with Vegas. Now that was a winner, so maybe it doesn't matter as much, but, I know he's got an Olympic gold medal from this year. Was, still a successful season, but, not being able to come through and score a goal that could help his team, I'm sure is something that he'll be thinking about when he's in the gym or laying in bed at night or wherever it is.
To your point, Jacob Slavin also got himself an Olympic gold this year. He's among the few NHLers to have won a gold medal and a Stanley Cup in the same year. I think the last American to do it was Ken Morrow of the New York Islanders. I'm trying to remember.
John and Taves did it in 2010. I remember with Chicago, and Duncan Keith anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, but for sure, like a whole bunch of other Canadians have done it, but I believe Ken Morrow's the last American to accomplish that feat in the same year. A broader question to come on the Carolina Hurricanes, considering the fact they went 16-3, I think the fewest losses by a Stanley Cup winner in like 40 years throughout a run. How will history, or how should history remember this group?
It's a good question. You know what? I was been thinking about this because we often get into like the copycat discussion around teams that win. I don't know that there's a copycat element for Carolina, except that, and this is probably something every front office should embrace anyway. But what they've done is they had a very clear vision how they want to play. They went and found players that they felt could do that and obviously fit in with that. And they just kept at it. Like they didn't get overly discouraged with negative results. They didn't make a brand new plan because it didn't work one year. And, I think there's something to that each team is going to play a little different. Like obviously there's one Rod Brind'Amour on earth. I mean, it's pretty rare to have someone who coaches a team, but who's like almost emblematic of the team, because he played there for so long and is, it's called it home. He was an assistant coach for 7 years. He's now 8 years behind the bench. You're not going to have that equivalency in other markets. But I think that, kind of creating a vision for what your team is and then just working at it. And, the way I'll remember these Hurricanes, like they were put together in impressive fashion. Like they found a lot of these guys when it wasn't an obvious pickup. Do you know what else they did? They recognized when they had something before the players popped, right? Like this is starting right now. Logan Stankoven next year begins an 8-year contract making $6 million. Jackson Blake next year begins an 8-year contract making $5 and change. Even Brandon Bussi was signed in season to a 3-year extension, $1.9 million. I mean, if they were negotiating any of those deals starting now, the price is just going to be higher, right? I mean, you're negotiating with a Stanley Cup champion. You're negotiating Logan Stankoven just led the playoffs in goal scoring. And Jackson Blake had a great run, part of that line with Stankoven, Hall, and Blake that really was the offensive driver of Carolina's success. But, not only did they go find these guys, they recognized what they had and paid them and got them locked into deals that I think are just going to age with a lot of grace, a lot of beauty. And, it doesn't mean they'll be career Hurricanes if something changes down the line. But even if you get to a point you have to trade any of them, I just think those contracts are going to be value contracts to move down the road. And so, they've just done a ruthlessly good job of I think sticking with it. So many people were clowning on them. I'll say this. We were never one on this show for like the whole Rantanen exchange. I was always applauding that move because they went out and made a major trade for Mikko Rantanen. And then instead of doubling down on that once it was clear he wasn't going to sign an extension before the deadline, they went and made a second move. And if you look at that move, Julian, there's a lot of interesting aspects to it. Like when they were talking to Dallas at the deadline in 2025, the Carolina Hurricanes could have had Jason Robertson in the trade, I believe. And they actually prioritized and chose Stankoven over Robertson, I think, because they felt he would fit in better with their system. And, look, lo and behold, I mean, obviously Stankoven was a huge contributor to this playoffs, but they also ended up getting 2 first-round picks in addition to Stankoven. They turned one of them in part into Keandre Miller last summer, and that was a huge deal looking back in terms of the success of the Hurricanes this season. And so, yeah, it didn't work. It didn't work out how they initially hoped or wanted, but they just, I think that they kept a laser vision on what they were trying to do and still turned it into something beneficial for their team. And arguably they might be better off without Mikko Rantanen because, Stankoven fits so well. Keandre Miller's now there for years to come. They still have an extra first round pick that, they can either make or trade for something else down the road. I mean, they just have so much optionality. For a team that just won the Stanley Cup, they got lots of assets. They made one trade at the deadline and it was for Nick Delorier, who obviously was just a depth forward, played a handful of games for them down the stretch and into the playoffs, but they didn't, unload a bunch of first round picks to load up at the trade deadline. The Carolina is well poised, I think, to be competitive for years to come just because of what they still have coming in their system. I mean, their American Hockey League team in Chicago right now is playing in the Calder Cup against the Toronto Marlies. So obviously they have some young players there to like, and their roster's young. So, I mean, this was an impressive group. And I'm out of the prediction game, so I'm not going to say they're going to be in the next 3 Cup finals, but I certainly think they're built in a way that they're going to be a top team for years to come. And they're going to have other chances to add, Stanley Cups to the one they just won in 2026. So, how history will remember them, Julian, is they're just going to remember that this was their big breakthrough moment. But I think it's the start of something, rather than the end of it. And that even that in itself is crazy because when you look at it, they've won a playoff series each of the last 8 years. So if they do continue this kind of run, I mean, you could be talking about something we're not really accustomed to seeing in the Cap era because, a lot of teams just hard to stay that good for that long, but they've made too many good decisions. I don't see them going away.
What do you make of the victory lap that's been happening, particularly online, in light of Eric Tulsky winning, particularly for bloggers, people from the analytic community who have been celebrating this victory, particularly because of the fact that Eric Tulsky, who's so smart, like you can look at his credentials to figure out how smart he is. He's the mastermind as GM of this team who made all those trades you mentioned, who took all those risks and big swings, which there are a lot of GMs in this league who would not do the same moves that Eric Tulsky did. I don't mean to make it sound like a glazing segment of Eric, but I think the Canes deserve a ton of credit for taking risks that I think a lot of other teams would not do.
Yeah, and they've married a little bit of old school and new school because, Rod Brindamore is obviously an old school type of coach. I mean, for any of our listeners or viewers that are old enough to remember how he played, I mean, he was a hard-nosed forward, Selke Trophy kind of guy, but he's the definition of sort of hockey lifer, played so long in the league, has been coaching. Like it's like hockey just flows out of his veins. Eric Tulsky was, doing things that I can't even wrap my mind around in other careers that have nothing to do with hockey and was just a hockey fan who's turned his passion and his intelligence into this. And so unfortunately, I don't think Eric Tulsky's grow on trees. There's lots of smart people out there, but maybe not so many smart people that marry, their high level of intelligence or education to hockey. But I definitely think this will open the door. He's already done this, but I think you'll see even more teams go this way in the NHL. it's happened already in Major League Baseball. A lot of sort of non-traditional general managers in that sport, people who had, aerospace degrees, and it's just things that aren't sort of obvious paths to a major league front office have been hired and had a lot of success. And make no mistake about it. I mean, on the staff of the Hurricanes, there's a lot of those types of people. Tyler Dello, the assistant general manager with Carolina, a former colleague of ours at The Athletic, ironically enough, but also, began way back when in the blogging space, was a lawyer, worked for the Oilers a little bit, and then the New Jersey Devils in a more senior role, and then ultimately went up a spot in Carolina. But I mean, certainly it's a front office that operates a little differently. They do have Justin Williams in their front office as well, who's, the ex-hockey player. But I think they've done a good job of finding the happy medium between, making just numbers-based decisions, but also, the fact that they went out and traded for Nick Delorier as an example. Like, that wouldn't be an analytically driven move. I think that they recognized they got into a few playoff series in past years against Florida, notably, and maybe physically were kind of taken out of those series. One thing someone associated with the team mentioned to me was that he felt that the Jordan Staal face-off with Brady Tkachuk right off the start of the playoffs, where Jordan answered the call and fought Brady, would actually set a tone that kind of echoed through the playoffs for the Hurricanes, just because there was always that idea they could be bullied a little bit. And, Jordan Staal is not a big fighter. I think he's a big, strong man. He's not afraid to answer a challenge, but he certainly doesn't go looking for that. And the fact that he did that, and then ultimately they played Nick Delorier, I think, in one game, maybe the game 4 in Ottawa, and Brady wanted no part of fighting him, that they felt like their ability to kind of at least hold their own, and the physical department allowed them to play the way they needed to play to have the success they did. And lo and behold, they found a way through, and pretty impressive team, I have to say. The first 4 games of that series were like a sugar rush, just all over the place. And then it started to feel a little bit more like Carolina series. Although, look, they even went down 1-0 in game 5. Dorofeyev scored early in that game, but once Staal tied it and they got back, it started to feel inevitable they were going to win. And certainly I don't think there's any question they were the best team this year.
Speaking of Jordan Staal, he's this year's Conn Smythe Trophy winner as playoff MVP. The ballots for everyone who voted on the Conn Smythe Trophy were released by the PHWA the other day. I know you were among the many who voted for Jordan Staal. Why him for playoff MVP?
That came out of conversations with a lot of people I had around the Hurricanes, people that watch the team much more closely than me and watched even the playoffs, and his performance, were around on every single day. Look, the historical nature of scoring in 5 straight Stanley Cup Final games, I don't think can be overlooked. They weren't pushed too hard really in those first 3 rounds. I know, Ottawa had its moments in that series, for example. Montreal did win game 1 of the Eastern Conference Final, but, they were a lot better than those teams at the end of the day, and won fairly easily. It was not easy in the Cup Final. And if it's not for, Staal scoring a game winner in game 4, but also some other big goals in that series, and then you add on the fact that he was their top matchup centerman, and that the players he played against on the other side basically did nothing across 4 playoff rounds. The fact that he is their most commonly used penalty killer, and, they killed 93% of penalties in the playoffs. And I think that was a big difference maker, especially in the Vegas series. The fact that he took like 100 more faceoffs than any other Hurricane, and won, even in the final, I don't know if you saw, he set a new record, or second best ever faceoff percentage in the Stanley Cup Final. It just felt like there was no area of the game he didn't touch. He scored 3 power play goals too. And, for a team that is a team that didn't give us one person where I felt like it had to be them, it just started to feel right. But look, I mean, Staal is not, if you look across history, this kind of player hasn't often won. I mean, it's usually, if it's a forward, it's a top scorer. He was not a top scorer in these playoffs, but he did score 6 goals in the Stanley Cup Final and in 5 straight games. And so, I think that the combination of his defensive impacts, what he meant to the team, and then the big goals when they needed someone to elevate, when they needed a moment, when they needed someone to calm things down. As I mentioned, they went down 1-0 on home ice in game 5. It's a 2-2 series at that point. It's a swing moment. Who scores the goal? I mean, it's Staal that goes in there, hits McNabb, goes to the net and gets a tip-in goal. I mean, I felt like adding that all together, it was him. But, I wrestled with it. Stankoven, I thought, with his 11 goals, with him centering the team's top offensive line, had a real case. I thought Taylor Hall had a case too, especially, he was strong in the closeout game, scored the opening goal in game 6. Had any of those players won, I don't think I'd have an issue, but it felt right with Staal. And you could see even the way Rod Brindamore talked about it after the game that the Hurricanes themselves felt it was the correct decision. So, I think it's one that's all wide open for debate because they had 7 different players get at least one vote. So there's obviously other players on the roster that were in the conversation, but Jordan Staal for me was, as I went through that, worked through that, talked to people, it was a fairly obvious vote when it came time to do it.
I would have picked Taylor Hall, but you made a great point in saying that, first off, just all the different attributes and all the different accomplishments he's had throughout the postseason, even if he wasn't scoring, and the fact that you're there in the building and you're around Canes players management the whole way, you can talk to those guys and get a better sense of who might be a better pick as opposed to someone who's watching the series from their couch and doesn't have that same access. That's a really good point.
Well, and most valuable doesn't have to just be goals and points, right? Like who was the most valuable contributor to their run? I mean, I think in the playoffs, the games are so tight, the fact that he was so reliable defensively, like literally every top forward he faced in each of the rounds had 0 goals, including Jack Eichel in the final. That's worth something more than just, there's some points that players get. And this is every player. It's not a shot at anyone that they don't really matter. Like someone scores the 5th goal in a 5-1 win along the way. Right. And that doesn't really count the same if you look at it in terms of bringing value to the team as what, Staal's goals in this final all of them were huge. The only goal that wasn't either a go-ahead goal or a tying goal, he scored the goal the night they came back from 4-0 down. He scored the 3rd goal to get them to 4-3. But even that's a big goal because they did tie it after that and had a chance to win in overtime. So, I just felt like he had the mix of everything. And it was that kind of year. If they had a player like Mitch Marner who had 29 points, maybe it's a different conversation, but they just were such a well-balanced team. I mean, it's hard to pick one guy off the line. I mean, it's fair that you identified Hall, but I also like Stankoven off that line. And then Blake had a couple, big moments in the Cup final too. I mean, it was a hard team to identify one standout performer. But I think when you looked at the body of how it all went, Jordan made a lot of sense. And I'll say this, the local writers in Raleigh, I'm pretty sure Corey Lavalette, Chip Alexander, I believe they also had Staal. And, those guys have been covering the team for literally decades, not just, for 10 or 15 games this spring.
Any other lingering thoughts on Carolina before I ask you a question or two about Vegas?
I think we should highlight the Bussi story a little more. I mean, the only thought about him is, I don't know what this does to our thoughts about goaltending in general, but, my view is that it's going to be more normal to see multiple goalies every year for even successful teams. And Carolina was hugely successful. I mean, Frederik Andersen went rough math in my head, 13-4 in the playoffs.
Yeah.
No, 13-3, sorry. And then actually, does Bussi get tagged with the loss because they tied that game up when he came in 4-0?
I could do those on the fly but I could check.
Point is, Freddie contributed 13 wins. Bussi contributed the last 3 wins. I think that's going to be more normal. And it's pretty crazy when you look back to how things went. So let's go back to last offseason. Florida wins the Stanley Cup. They signed Brandon Bussi to be in competition for their backup job / number 3 role. Carolina, cup hungry, signs Caden Primo last summer to be in that number 3 spot. We get going through training camp and Florida takes Tarasov as their backup. They're going to put Bussi on waivers and, Caden Primo wasn't going to make the Hurricanes. And one thing I'd heard is that the Hurricanes figured or heard that the Toronto Maple Leafs were going to put in a claim on Primo. And so they preemptively, because their goaltending coach, had really liked Bussi, they put a claim in on Bussi just because they knew they needed another goalie. They wanted more depth there. And so, that set of decisions, like months later, who could predict that guy's the one closing out, in his 43rd ever career appearance in NHL, he's delivering a shutout in Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final. I mean, a real Cinderella story, but also a reminder that, there are definitely goaltending experts out there, and I recommend that you listen to them, but we are not those guys, and that who could predict any of this stuff? I mean, I don't even think, as much as Carolina's goalie coach liked Bussi, I don't think when they were selecting him off waivers, they'd ever dreamed he'd be the man in the moment, and that they'd have this kind of moment. But good for him, and pretty cool story. I just think one of those like stick with your dreams, kids, because you never know where it's going to take you kind of things. And now we'll see what Carolina does with its goaltending this summer. Frederik Andersen's a pending UFA. Kochetkov has one more year in his deal. Bussi's been extended already. Maybe there's a world where he's coming back as the sort of number 1A next year. We'll just have to see how that all plays out.
31-6-2 in the regular season with an .895 save percentage, and then gets a little limited time in the playoffs, but meaningful time nonetheless. 3-0-1 with a .931 save percentage and a 1.60 GAA. So yeah,
he does take that game 3 loss because they did tie the game after he entered it, and then obviously the bad bounce, the Shea Theodore double overtime goal. But anyway, pretty crazy all around that. He's made 3 starts and he's 3-1 in the playoffs in his career. the biggest games you could ever play, basically.
Yeah. Also, didn't know anything about the fact that the Leafs wanting Caden Primo led to that. That is, I think, pretty wild.
Look at it. It's always going to be at the end of camps. There is a little bit of a goalie rotation because sometimes, in the Leafs case, if you remember, Joseph Woll was away on personal leave at that point, so they need another goalie. They brought James Reimer into training camp on a PTO. They decided not to sign him. They went with Primo instead. And that set of machinations, because Carolina's like, well, we can't just lose Primo and not have another goalie. Oh, here's another goalie we like on waivers. Even the Florida Panthers, if you're a Panthers fan, you might be like, hey, why didn't we just keep him as a backup? But I mean, this is the second guessing we can do 8 months later. But there's always a little bit of roulette going around. I think at the end of camps with goalies, and quite honestly, with teams having more roster space now, I think there's a real argument to keep 3 goalies in a lot of circumstances, just because your third goalie might end up being important, and there's a risk of losing that player in a lot of cases on waivers, as is what happened with Bussi from Florida to Carolina.
Makes sense. We're at a time anyway where NHL teams, it feels like they're looking for more tandems as opposed to just, can I find a number 1 guy who could play 60, 65, 70 games? Those guys are gone. You want your number 1 goaltender playing max between 50, 55.
But I think even the 50 game goalie is like a dinosaur. Like there's definitely a few guys out there that do it pretty much every year, but I think we're going to get to more like the 20, 25, 35 setup, or, like I just feels like that's where we're going. It's almost like pitchers in baseball. I think there's going to be just more almost like situational use or like planned rests. The playoffs is a different beast. It's hard to on purpose alternate goalies. A couple of teams have tried it, and I don't feel like it works that much. But I think a great what if before we put a bow on the Stanley Cup Final, quite honestly, is if Vegas had have at least tried Adin Hill. Maybe even the third period of Game 5, just to see if he could give them kind of a Bussi like shot in the arm. Because clearly Carter Hart did not perform well in the Stanley Cup. A lot of pucks went by him. Even the first goal in Game 6 from Taylor Hall, I feel like in that moment, you want your goalie to have that one low blocker. So I just think that we're going to get used to seeing more goalies in more games. It's not the days of Martin Brodeur or even Vasilevsky, playing every minute of the playoffs. I think it's going to become increasingly rare.
Picture this. It's late at night. You're scrolling through your feeds, and all of a sudden you see it. That one product you've been looking for. You click on the link, you add to your cart. Maybe you even shop around a little more before finally hitting checkout. And as you're filling in your address, you realize you don't have your credit card anywhere near you. That's when you see it. That purple pay button that has all of your information saved, making checking out as simple as a tap on your screen. That is life with Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the United States, from household names like Allbirds, even Heinz, to brands just getting started. And if you want to get the word out there for your brand, you want to get involved with Shopify, you can have it as if you have a marketing team behind you. You could easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling and strolling. Best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and so much more. See less carts go abandoned and more sales go with Shopify and their Shop Pay button. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/Johnston. That's shopify.com/Johnston. One more time, shopify.com/Johnston. Any lingering thoughts on Vegas? They lose in 6. Mitch Marner obviously was a story throughout most of the playoffs. Not so much of a dynamo in the closing games of this series. There's a lot of different directions we can go into. John Tortorella making the vow, hey, we'll be back for game 7. I left my clothes in the hotel room. Someone's going to have to go pick them up at this point. Any other lingering thoughts on Vegas?
I saw the Hurricanes admin offered to do it, but said it might take a few days because they're tied up for the next couple of days. Yeah, look, I don't place the loss at Marner's feet by any means. I think, he had some teammates that didn't contribute nearly as much as him offensively. Obviously, they needed a little more offense to push that series, to try to get it to a game 7, and didn't come from Eichel. Didn't come from some others on the roster. Losing William Karlsson was a blow. And I think they really found their best game when he came back into the playoffs after being away for most of the regular season. It gave them real balance across 3 lines. For whatever reason, playing Marner with Eichel this year, those two didn't produce results. I don't know if there's something stylistically about their games. It just doesn't blend well, but I think they're better served to have Eichel on one line and Marner on a second line. And even, they were able to have Stone on a third line when we were fully healthy. Not having that hurt them. So, I don't have any hot takes for you. I would have liked to see Mitch Marner speak after the game. I'll tell you that stuck out to me as like another unforced error, in my opinion. Having done 20 Stanley Cup Finals, often nights I've been assigned to the losing room, and every single player of note that lost the Stanley Cup that I can remember has spoken, from Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl the last 2 years, all the way back in 2009. I remember I was writing a sidebar on Marian Hossa, who, at that point in time, pretty in the spotlight guy, because in 2008, he went to the Cup Final with Pittsburgh against Detroit. That summer, he chose not to sign a big money deal in Pittsburgh and took a 1-year deal to go to the team that just beat him, the Detroit Red Wings. And lo and behold, they play in the playoffs again. They go down to the wire. They play game 7 and they lose 2-1. So he lost them back-to-back cups. I remember he spoke for like 10 minutes about all that and was so gracious with his time. I don't think there's honestly, I get that maybe Leafs fans are piling on. I don't think there's all that much to pile on with Marner. He had a great playoffs, couldn't find it at the end, but was far from alone on his team. I don't think it benefited him at all to no show the media. Eichel didn't speak as well. Makes me also think that 2nd round pick that Vegas gave up for, skirting media obligations earlier during the playoffs. Like, I just can't see it coming back with the way some of those things went during the series. There was a whole incident with Carter Hart. Also, he did end up speaking once during the series, but they were trying to hide that he was skating. So it wasn't just sort of a weird, some weird things going on there. But, end of the day, Marner had a great playoffs. I think there's way more good than bad from the last few months for Mitch Marner out of that, quite honestly. I think he should take confidence from it. I'm sure he's destroyed at getting this close and losing. You play into mid-June. And you end up with nothing. You almost like, why did I go through all that? And still, it's an empty feeling, but, he silenced a lot of doubters, I believe. He just had so many big moments in the playoffs. His game 3 in the Stanley Cup Final is one of the greatest individual performances we've ever seen. I realize you can hold up the game 4, 5, and 6 numbers, as many have, but I look at a team that wasn't performing well enough, not just an individual there.
Between John Tortorella, Mitch Marner for reasons, Carter Hart, the media stuff, the Vegas Golden Knights, and I'm speaking from a person watching at a distance here, the Vegas Golden Knights appear to be the most unlikable Stanley Cup finalist I've ever seen. That's how I see it. Like, there are probably other teams that probably rank up there for that category, but with all of the different things around this team, and I know I've said in the past, hey, you need a villain. This is like a little beyond that for me. I think the Vegas Golden Knights, the way that they've been conducting themselves, I don't like it. And I think they're acting like they're above a lot of they act like they're above the law. I don't like that. So that's what I want to say on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, they do things their own way, and it's worked. So, at the end of the day, I realize they didn't win the Stanley Cup, but they've had more success pretty much than anyone the last 9 years since they entered the league. And I don't expect the way they do business to change in a meaningful way, quite honestly. I think they're just going to, it's brought them success. I don't see anything changing. So, they don't mind being the villains, or certainly at the start of the series, there's a lot of questions about that. It's funny. There were some parallels between Carolina and Vegas, in that Carolina does things its own way. Now, I'm not saying it's viewed as a villain for that, but, the Hurricanes front office, there's teams around the league, I think, that kind of grumble at how they do business. And look, this is part of it. This is a competitive world. This is a competitive industry. Only one team can win, and two teams that are pretty clear in how they want to operate, played all the way till, middle of June this year. And so I don't think either of them are going to change. And so I don't know, call them what you want. It used to be the Canes were the bunch of jerks, but
looks like Vegas took that title.
Well,
anyway,
I'm not even saying that. But look, they lost a second round pick, and I think it was $1 million fine or $100,000 fine to John Tortorella. I mean, that hasn't happened too often. I mean, it is a sign that the league, they're even on the bad side of the league right now, and that's just a fact.
Yeah. Anyway, actually, you know what? I do have one final Stanley Cup question for you. Yay or nay on Rod Brind'Amour and his cup raise 20 years after his iconic stomp with the cup, him throwing the cup in the air and catching it. What'd you think of that?
It was amazing. I mean, yes. most people couldn't pull off that maneuver. I wouldn't recommend that. Don't try this at home. But I thought it was hilarious. It was one of the things that stood out from their cup pass line. I don't know why he did it. I actually asked him why, and he's like, I'm not sure what's going on in that moment. He just said he just sort of like blacked out and it happened. But he gave it a big old bear hug. And after 20 years of chasing it, you can imagine, even though he's won it once, it must be pretty good feeling to get it back into your arms.
Awesome. Great coverage of the Stanley Cup Final, CJ. You, Michael Russo, the rest of our crew at The Athletic, Pierre LeBrun, Corey Lavalette, too, tapping in whenever we need him as well. I think we did a really great job. And Jesse Granger, too. Sean Gentili. I'm trying to remember everyone who covered the Cup Final for us at The Athletic. But great coverage for you guys. You guys did a really great job. Yeah. Oh, for sure. We were out in force for sure. Just a quick news and note here. Earlier this week was announced the investigation on Mike Babcock from the NHL has begun. We know there's interest from the Edmonton Oilers in having him as their head coach. Any updates on that? Your thoughts on how that's going?
Yeah, basically there's a series of Zoom calls called, with the league this week, and the PA, I believe, is involved in terms of just talking to players and staff and people that were around that situation in Columbus in 2023 before Babcock, parted ways with the Blue Jackets. My understanding is he's himself is going to talk to the league as part of this process. And, basically the league has to close the book on that situation and decide, is there some sort of penalty that will be imposed against Babcock for his behavior and his actions at that time or not? And then obviously that, I think, will inform Edmonton's decision. I do not have any expectation that he's not going to be allowed to coach in Edmonton. I've made that point previously, but even subsequent conversations I've had, I understand this is a bit of a polarizing hire, and people out there have feelings about it. But the key decision makers with the Oilers, I believe, are 100% on board with bringing Babcock in. But it really rests in the league's hand. The league also has not said how long this investigation might take, but I think they're going to want to conduct it in pretty short order. Here's the reality is the league had a pretty good idea what happened back when it all went down in 2023. It just didn't have a reason to do what we would call a fulsome, top to bottom investigation, because the Blue Jackets and Babcock mutually parted ways pretty soon after these allegations and discussions, came to light. So, I think that everyone, including Edmonton, feels like they know what went on. I'll point you to this. Babcock's history is certainly one thing, and it's a conversation point around this. He was the coach in Columbus for 78 days over the summer. Like, he didn't even coach a practice. And so The reason I say that is there wasn't a lot of time for there to be like there's obviously issues with some of these meetings he had with players and looking at their phones and maybe some of the things that were said in those meetings. But I don't know if there's anything beyond that. And I don't want to diminish anything, and I really don't want to get ahead of myself, but he never was even running practice, or like there wasn't a lot of time to get into, it speaks to how insane it all was that he got, pushed out the door or whatever, jumped off the train that quickly. But there wasn't a lot of time for a whole bunch of things to happen. And so I think the league should be able to get to the bottom of what went on pretty quickly here. And then we'll see, does he get a suspension? Do they just say, you know what? I mean, this was not a great look, but no real rules were broken. I don't know where that's going to land. And then Edmonton has a decision to make.
Really curious about how that one goes. I know we've talked about it on previous shows before, but just really curious with how that one goes. Also curious too, I know we've mentioned the fact that like players at the top of the team may want this. I'm also curious about other guys down the lineup and maybe other people who would want to play in Edmonton, and they see Mike Babcock as a possibility as a head coach, knowing what other players have said in the past about him. It's still a bit of a head scratcher for me, Siege. Yeah,
that's fair. But I think, look, there's definitely that thought out there, but there's also a thought guys are going to want to play for him. Like, I mean, we have to remember all things for all people is not everyone needs or wants the same thing. History will tell the tale whether this was a good decision or not, but Edmonton was clearly locked in on a certain type of coach. There's only so many of those type of coaches out there, and Babcock is their guy unless the league tells them or makes a decision that makes it think, hey, this is not going to happen. So, I still am under the belief that he's going to be hired there, but we really have to see what this investigation brings before I can say that with 100% certainty.
Any other tidbits regarding whether it's the Leafs coaching vacancy, anyone else who could be a possibility for the Oilers? Even John Tortorella was getting asked about his future after the Stanley Cup Final. What could be in store for him next?
Yeah, I think it's more likely than not that Tortorella isn't back in Vegas. I believe it really was a short-term arrangement, and it nearly worked. I mean, it certainly improved the fortunes of a team that was in danger of missing the playoffs with 8 games left in the season to play all the way to Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final. But I just did get the feeling that he's going to be there long term. And even the fact he himself, after the loss on Sunday, was a little non-committal about his own future. It just feels like that this is the time that Vegas is going to pivot to their younger option, to Ryan Craig with their American Hockey League team, who, had been an assistant coach prior with Vegas before going down and getting that head coaching experience. So he'll be presumably part of the mix, although at a time where, there's only 2 official openings, and Edmonton seems down the road on what they're going to decide. As for the Leafs, I think there'll be a little more urgency now that we're on the other side of the Cup Final. They've obviously taken their time, spoken to a whole bunch of candidates. I've gotten the impression they're maybe not looking for a hard driving coach. I don't think they're shopping for someone with the attributes of a Mike Babcock necessarily, even though they have talked obviously to Patrick Waugh and others that might be known for having a certain way. But I don't see the fit for Tortorella because of that fact. You'll be interested to see, do they ask for, and will they be granted permission to speak to Cassidy now that Vegas is out of the playoff mix? I mean, that has kind of faded into the background, of course, as the Golden Knights kept playing and jobs were filled around the league. But, I guess Bruce does have his own reputation as a bit of a hard pushing coach on his team. So maybe he doesn't totally jive with what I said I've been starting to hear around the Leaf search. But I do think now that the Cup Final is in the rearview mirror, we're going to see a little more urgency and get closer to a decision there for Toronto, because ideally you want that person in place by the draft, and the draft is coming up pretty quickly.
Okay, let's do a quick Ask CJ. This is where we take in questions from people who watch or listen to the show, and they send them out throughout social media. I do have a question from myself, though. I just want to ask this off top. Now that we are in the off season, which event are you looking forward to the most? Is it the draft? Is it free agency? Just the idea that GMs might get going on trades, which you can't put a specific date on that, but that could be very unpredictable. Something else going on. The Board of Governors are meeting in a couple days too. Like, is there an event you're looking forward to the most of any off-season event?
I was going to say like July 5th when I can turn my phone off and walk away.
But beyond you taking a break, which you need.
Sorry, that one was just too obvious. It's in my mind.
Yes, you're right. That was good.
I would say, look, I think July 1st is still a great day in the league. Even if you don't necessarily have a headline item, you know, that's a day where there's just a lot of business gets done. It's the first day of the new calendar season in sort of a fiscal sense, but in an official sense. And trades are going to happen here in the next 2 weeks. I mean, that's a guarantee. But, you know, the trades are probably most exciting, but because there's not an event I can tie them to, like the experience last year, quite frankly, with this decentralized draft is there was a lot less trades made than what we used to see when everyone was in the same place in person. So I can't even point to the draft anymore and say that's where the trades will be, but they're going to occur here over the next 2 to 3 weeks in some amount of volume, I would think. So, you know, July 1st is probably the event I'm most excited for. I hope the draft is a little better this year. It was really long last year. I don't know if you stuck through it, but it was about a 4.5 to 5 hour first round. Was not the best TV product. I know they're really focused on sharpening that up, and I hope they can do so. But for me, the event is July 1st because a whole bunch of players will get signed. We'll start to get a sense of what the teams are going to look like, and I think trades will be happening in around that window at the same time too.
I can't remember any other year where the likelihood of me having 2 screens going on July 1st would go up. Like TSN to watch you and the rest of the crew and whatever World Cup game is on that day. That is likely going to be my setup on July 1.
Well, don't quote me, but it's my understanding if Canada plays out of the group stage, that Canada is going to play on July 1st. But I don't know that for sure. I've just heard that internally.
I don't know if you saw the tweet from James Duffy a couple days ago, but there is a world where, depending on where Canada finishes, you know what? I'll read the tweet direct from James Duffy. I don't know if you've seen it. Way too early, and Canada has loftier goals, but still kind of tantalizing. If the United States wins its group and Canada comes in third, almost certain they would meet in Santa Clara in the round of 32 on Canada Day. There is an outside chance the free agent frenzy could come in clash with a USA-Canada game at the World Cup.
Wow.
On Canada Day.
I mean, selfishly, as someone who's part of the free agent frenzy coverage, I don't know how I feel about that because if we're going to do it, I want people to watch it. But I mean, what an event. If Canada plays a World Cup game that matters on Canada Day in North America, I mean, that's a pretty cool outcome, right? So let's. You
don't have like Canada USA fatigue?
No, not at all. I mean, it's the U.S. looked pretty good in its opening game of the World Cup, so
they did.
I don't know if that's what I would call a good draw for Canada, but you know, we'll see. Take care of business against Qatar and Switzerland, and let's meet the U.S. further down the road.
Absolutely, and keep that passion up in the group chats for those games when they're on too, CJ.
I enjoyed the first one. It was stressful, but it was fun.
I can tell.
It was fun.
JDD wants to know, what are your thoughts on the Sin City Lobster Poutine that was apparently available at T-Mobile Arena during the Stanley Cup Final? According to Darren Ravel, who obviously knows about these things because he's nosy, it was worth $44. I don't know if you saw that going around at the arena.
Oh, I saw that it was a thing. It didn't look like it was going to appeal to me. I got to be honest. I mean, I would eat it. Like I would try it, but I didn't try it. I'm not sure I'd spend $44 on it either. So my thoughts are, you know, I don't know why like crazy food things have become kind of like the norm at sporting events, but you know, I like simplicity with my food. Like, as you know, I would just take a hot dog or something if I was, you know, going to a game. But some people, I guess,
a poutine hot dog.
Of course, I would. But I would. Point is I would just take a normal hot dog and be happy. But some people have finer tastes when I guess they go to a Golden Knights game.
Last one for you, Nick the Trick. Have you seen the Leafs melting ice reveal for the first overall pick? A lot of fans are speculating that it is for a new jersey. Have you heard anything about that? Is that something that would be speculated about, or does it just happen?
It would be speculated about, and I've seen some of the commentary online. I don't actually know if there is a new jersey coming, so I'll see if I can get to the bottom of that. But, you know, it kind of makes sense. You know, typically when jerseys get revealed, it often happens at the draft. Like it's kind of a neat thing to put the new jersey on your new draft pick. Like it's kind of like your shiny new toy on top of your shiny new toy. And so it's definitely a possibility, but I really do not know at this point in time. The Leafs, they're always limited a little bit by their history. Like, I think they don't want to go too far outside the box, but it's been a few years. I know they've had some of the reverse retro jerseys and things like that, the sort of third jerseys, but might be time to refresh the brand and putting it on over Gavin McKenna's shoulders, I'm sure might entice the people to go shopping on or about June 25th, June 26th or beyond.
Gavin McKenna wearing a new Leafs jersey and a new coach behind the bench who could be fill in the blank here.
I don't know the answer. That jersey getting passed from Matt Sundin on stage potentially, or I guess maybe he won't. There's a thing. It's a centralized draft. Like, I don't even know who'll be giving that out. I mean, there were some rumors of a celebrity give out, but whatever. Like, it's an event for the fans. I'm not that fired up about the draft itself, though.
To your point about the decentralized draft last year, it was cool for literally one moment with Matthew Schaefer getting picked and him showing emotion, and then it was just a drag. It was a slog. I hope that there's some way just to speed it up because, again, when you trust, it's not it with everybody, but I feel like a lot of times when you trust the NHL to show personality, just doesn't show through. So I'm okay with just speeding it up.
Gary Bettman at his State of the Union vowed that it's going to be quicker this year. So we will hold them to that.
I'm good with that. Anyways, great work as always, Siege. We'll be back later this week with a brand new episode of the Chris Johnston Show as we are fully into off-season mode over here at the Chris Johnston Show. The NHL draft to come, free agency, maybe there's a trade or 2 or 5, who knows. And we'll be there for all of it. Siege, enjoy some rest, my man.
Thanks, pal.
Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show. Hey, did you like the thing you just watched?
Was it hilarious? Was it informative? Was it me losing my mind?
Possibly. Potentially. Most of the time it is. Hey, listen, if you like what SDPN has to offer, you should check out more of our videos and subscribe to our channel by clicking subscribe, or Steve will find you.